Have you ever noticed that of the 10 Commandments, the one God gives most time to is the fourth, the command to rest? No other commandment receives this amount of attention, and yet this is the commandment that I violate most often and with least embarrassment. I fancy I'm not alone. Our inability to observe Sabbath may well be one of our greatest dangers in ministry, and here's why. We leaders thrive on accomplishment. We're wired for activity. We are driven to make the most of our time, maximise our opportunities. An extra hour to catch up while others are resting makes us feel like we're getting ahead of the game. Some of us wake early, others of us stay up late, all to get a few more things done. We check our phones during a family time. We pop into the office on our day off. Every extra hour is precious because our plates are full and we feel like they're spinning very fast. Sabbath is a little bit like a divine speed hump. It's an unwelcome attempt to slow us down. But if you're anything like me, you're a man in a hurry. We're tempted to see Sabbath as a luxury we can't afford. And if that's so, we're in trouble, because God doesn't agree. The language of the Hebrew Scriptures suggests that right from the start, God sets a rhythm in motion. It's a movement from being to doing. He intends us to work, but to work from a place of rest. If he chose to put down his tools, what makes me think I can keep up the frenetic pace that drives many of us to workaholism and burnout? Why is ignoring Sabbath so serious? Well, here are 4 reasons. 1, it plays into my pride. My inability to recognise my limits and to acknowledge my dependence on God is sin. Sabbath keeping is not a suggestion or a tip for successful ministry. It's a commandment. Ignoring it is violating God's directive. When I fail to take God at his word, I'm suggesting that somehow I know better. 2, it's an expression of my fear. Trusting God with my limitations is, frankly, frightening. I fear what it might mean for my identity, my reputation, my future, if there are elements of life that are not directly under my control. Out of fear, I seek to control every moment, manipulate every situation, even if it means violating God's command. 3, it's an act of selfishness. Exodus 23 provides a bit more explanation for why we should rest on the Sabbath. 6 days do your work, but on the 7th day do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and so that the slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. How interesting is that? So observing the Sabbath isn't all about me then. When I rest, I create space for those around me to rest. When I fail to rest, I deny my family and those who work with me the opportunity to rest. 4, it reduces me to a slave. Amongst other things, observing Sabbath was intended to remind the Israelites that there was no Sabbath in Egypt. Our observing Sabbath is a declaration that we are not willing to be slaves, not to our culture's expectations, not to our congregation's demands, not to our family's hopes, not even to our own insecurities. It's important that we learn to speak this truth to ourselves, otherwise we'll feel guilty for taking time off. I know we have different views on what keeping Sabbath means. My point here is that whether or not we believe in observing a specific day, the principle of taking rest applies to us all. Sabbath is meant to protect us from ourselves, from our busyness, from the tyranny of the urgent. It's also for our enjoyment of creation, of our family and friends, and above all of our God. Sabbath helps to create the margins that keep us safe. How do we observe Sabbath in the midst of busyness? We'll think a bit more about that in the new year. In the meantime, may you and yours enjoy a delightful dose of Sabbath. this Christmas.